going to focus here more on the captive and merchant markets here. So what we know right now is the current demand is within the oil refining sector, but we also think that the future hydrogen demand lies in a variety of different sectors, such as passenger vehicles, heavy-duty vehicles, in building sector and the industry. So this graph is coming out of E3, which is a large environmental consultancy in California. And what they predicted was by the year 2045, the hydrogen demand in Western United States would be as much as between 15 to 20 million metric tons per year. And much of that demand is going to come from the state of California. So there are really two ways in which we could produce hydrogen from biomass. And when we talk about biomass, there are a variety of different biomass available in the state of California. So there is woody biomass, there's municipal solid waste, and also agricultural residues. But here we're focusing on the woody biomass. So one pathway is through gasification, and the second pathway is through pyrolysis. As gasification is done at a much higher temperature, between 7 to 1200 degrees Celsius, whereas pyrolysis is done at a much lower temperature at about 500 degrees Celsius. So in gasification, you convert that woody biomass into a mixture of gases known as syngas, and that syngas can be catalytically converted into a mixture of hydrogen and carbon dioxide. H2 is separated from CO2, and CO2 is generally vented into the atmosphere. In pyrolysis, instead of converting that woody biomass into a mixture of gases, what you do is convert that woody biomass into something known as bio-oil. And this is the rough chemical composition of bio-oil, CH1.4O.6. And then you can upgrade this bio-oil or catalytically convert that bio-oil into a mixture of hydrogen and CO2. And just like you do separate hydrogen from CO2 in steam methane reforming, you can also do that through the pyrolysis process. Again, the CO2 is vented into the atmosphere and hydrogen is separated from the CO2. So this CO2 that is coming out of woody biomass gasification can also be captured, compressed, and you can stick it underground in geologic formations. And hydrogen, which is produced with an integration of carbon capture and storage, is in fact one of the only ways in which you could produce carbon negative hydrogen. And that means, again, you are removing CO2 from the atmosphere. So this graph that you see on the right-hand side is showing us that California offers ideal geology in terms of carbon sequestration. So the entire Central Valley that is highlighted here in green color offers a very suitable geology for CO2 sequestration underground. So when we talk about how ready is a particular technology, we use a scale known as technology readiness level. And that really tells us, okay, whether the technology is really in the beginning, such as in the research stage, or it has been commercialized. So this scale is from 1 to 9, with 1 being at a very basic research and development stage, and 9 being fully commercialized. So what you see here is that since steam methane reforming, it has been used for a number of years all over the world, it is at level 9, which means that it's fully commercialized. Biomass gasification and biomass gasification with carbon capture and storage. We know that the technology is there. We know the rough economics behind, converting that biomass into hydrogen. But what's lacking here is commercial size facilities in the state that convert that woody biomass into hydrogen. So it's somewhere between 5 and 6 at the TRL. Hydrogen can be produced not only from forest biomass, but other sources of biomass, such as municipal solid waste, agricultural residues. But what we focus here in our research is primarily on the forest residues. That means either sawmill residues or also forest residues that are coming out of thinning operations or other forest treatments. So a big question is around the biomass to hydrogen yield, and how much hydrogen can we get out of per unit of biomass? And we did a lot of research on that question, and what we found was that it's anywhere between 10 to 13 kilogram of bone dry tons that you need in terms of biomass to get 1 kilogram of hydrogen. So it's 1 to 13 is the ratio that we'd like to think in terms of converting biomass into hydrogen. Another big question surrounds the cost of hydrogen production. So this graph that you see here is showing us the dollars per kilogram of hydrogen produced. And what you can see is that steam methane reforming, again, it's at the lowest cost, around $1.26 per kilogram of hydrogen. Electrolysis with wind and solar, even though they have made a lot of progress in the past few years, but these processes are relatively inefficient, and that's why it's anywhere between $8 to $12 per kilogram of hydrogen. But what's really exciting here is that biomass gasification and biomass gasification with carbon capture and storage, we think are relatively competitive with steam methane reforming at about $2 for biomass gasification. But if you add carbon capture and CCS on top of that, then the price goes a little bit up towards around $3 per kilogram of hydrogen. So we know that if we produce hydrogen either through biomass gasification or steam methane reforming or electrolysis, it does produce some emission. And depending on the pathway that we're using, the emission varies. So this graph here is showing us the grams of CO2 equivalent per megajoule. So these are the same units that California's low carbon fuel standard uses when it evaluates the carbon intensity of different fuels. So for instance, gasoline is about 100, ethanol is 80 grams of CO2 equivalent per megajoule. And what you see here is that steam methane reforming is about 110 grams of CO2 equivalent per megajoule. But again, what's really exciting here is that biomass gasification with CCS is the only negative emission technology here, with negative 122 grams of CO2 equivalent per megajoule. That means you are removing CO2 from the atmosphere through biomass gasification with CCS. So this graph is coming from the Getting to Carbon Neutral report that Dan and his colleagues at Lawrence Livermore Institute, they put out a couple of years, I think it was last year, in which they estimated the total biomass availability in the state of California in 2025 and 2045. And what they estimated was that there is around 56 million bone dry tons of biomass available in the state of California, and much of it is in the form of forest biomass at about 24 to 26 million bone dry tons of forest residues in the state. So using this available biomass in the state of California, we estimated that it's sufficient to produce 1.7 million tons of hydrogen per year, which is sufficient to meet 85% of current state demand. And it's also roughly 2 times the merchant supply that we have in the state. We think that the cost of producing hydrogen from biomass is increasingly competitive with steam methane reforming at about $2 per kilogram of hydrogen without CCS, and 3.37 per kilogram with CCS. And again, there are 2 different pathways, gasification and pyrolysis. Gasification can be done at a much larger scale, and pyrolysis is done at a much lower and small and medium-sized scale. So the next step in the state of California are really to commercialize these facilities, and particularly with the integration of carbon capture and storage to get full carbon benefits. So I'm just going to stop here, and if you have any particular questions, I'm happy to answer those now or after Robert's presentation.
Thank you, Harris. I know that I have questions, and I know that you have some more analysis that you've done around investment. You can take it off the screen share if you're able to, and more analysis that you've done around IRR, CapEx, investment, and we may have questions about that later on. We'll see what people are interested to lean on, but just to say, I know you have done more research around the economics within the state of California on hydrogen production and the potential there. So we may have some questions on that. But let's first go ahead to, unless I've missed anything in the chat, let's first go ahead to Robert. And Robert, we have your slides. Our team is going to pull those up for you. And thank you so much, Robert, for kind of grounding us in what this actually looks like. So Harris, your fantastic overview of what hydrogen is and how we create it. Robert, take it away.
Okay. Harris, by the way, just real quickly, that's a nice report you came up with, because I know that wasn't there a couple of weeks ago. So I know there's a lot of work in it. And by the way, it very much lines up with what our discoveries over the past couple of years have found in regards to the statistical aspects of it and pricing and things like that. So,
sorry to interrupt you, Robert, but it looks like we're looking at your presentation screen, but you might be able to swap to the non-presenter view, I guess.
Okay.
The main screen. Thanks.
Okay. And so anyway, that's really great news, and because like I said, it corroborates what our business model is in a lot of ways. So I'll be making good use of it. What we are a gasification process, German technology. These are not new technologies. They've been around for a number of years, and like Harris said, there's several different types, slight hybrids of each other, but the one that we and the ones that are what they call oxygen-free or combustion-free gasification systems are by significant amount the cleanest and also the most productive, in the sense that the number of gigajoules going in from the biomass and the gigajoules you get out in the form of hydrogen or syngas before it becomes hydrogen. That ratio is the efficiency ratio, and it's important to get that up as high as possible because you get the higher yields and also less byproducts. So, and obviously combustion-free is cleaner. What you're seeing there is a 40-ton per day unit in Germany. It would be indoors in California, and that one runs MSW and turns into electricity. But once again, before they take the syngas from the reformer and run the syngas directly through generators and generate electricity. But that was 10 years ago, and hydrogen wasn't on the agenda at that point to the degree it is now. We looked at it as we've been at this about 10 years. So real quickly, if we can go to the next slide. We've modeled ours to initially everybody who had this type of gasification was doing MSW, because MSW was an income stream, and it helped offset and made the balance sheet look better. But we felt that the path of least resistance into the marketplace and to get moving is through agricultural and forest biomass. That's the bigger problem. MSW has got competition from very established companies who don't want to let that market go in the form of landfills and all kinds of infrastructure, and have a lot of political clout as well. So rather than fight that, the path of least resistance is solving a problem. We look at our solution as an economic development solution as well, because we can go to areas that have woody biomass, and that is a resource of theirs that they've not been able to utilize with the decline of cogen power plants. And so we can take these and offset the cost of collecting it by paying for it, and our economic model will pay for it. And we can take agricultural biomass and forest waste and use it for our feedstock. Our sizes will be 40-ton units and 40-ton per day units. By doing that, we'll have incredible efficiency in the construction and the procurement, and the cost will go down dramatically over the first few units. Even the first unit will be economical, though. So, if you want to go to the next slide. Once again, those two green things are Jenbacher generators, and that's the same facility we just showed. But the facility making hydrogen would not have those Jenbachers. Where those would be in that space, a little closer to the reformer itself, would be the steam shift that Harris referred to, where the hydrogen is the syngas is heated and reformed, and you end up with 60% hydrogen. And in our case, the remaining gas isn't CO2. The primary remaining gas is CO, carbon monoxide. And because there's no combustion in the process, this is very important. There's no combustion in the process of the gasification. You don't get soot, or you don't get tars or sulfurs. The gas is pristine. It's in the 0.99 pure range of contaminants. And so when you separate it, it needs very, very little cleaning to be 0.999 hydrogen, which is what's required to use in fuel cells. And so that's not required typically. But the main thing is we end up with 60% hydrogen, and from the biomass to the syngas, we get 60% efficiency, which is extremely high. That's again because we're not combusting anything. So the system is heated. And the gasification occurs through heat from multiple sources in the chamber, and then it stays constantly hot. And the system and the material flows constantly through the gasification chamber. So after the water gas shift, you separate the hydrogen and the carbon, and because all the gases are pure, and technically because they're coming from biomass, renewable biomass, that even the CO now has a much higher value than conventional CO that's used in many industries and industrial uses. So we can sell it there and offset some of the costs, so we're not releasing it in the atmosphere. And so the remaining gases, which are in the 7th percentile of the total gas, 2% of CO2, and there's some other gases, but there is some NOx coming off, but NOx are easily captured. There's all kinds of things that can capture that and remediate it. And so the other product, for every 40 tons of material that goes through a day, we also get 7 tons of biochar. So the two co-products are the syngas, which is eventually hydrogen, and biochar, which is carbon remediation, and it's in high concentration, 7 tons a day. So that really helps our carbon intensity score, the one Harris just mentioned, because once again, we're not creating any measurable atmospheric gases in the process of making it. We're cleanly converting the biomass, the forest waste or the agricultural waste. So we're taking it, and then the finished products are biochar and hydrogen. And so it's because of that efficiency and the fact that our hydrogen score, our renewable score, carbon intensity score here in California is so high that we are firmly in the green hydrogen category. So there we are the third source of green hydrogen besides wind and solar electricity produced electrolysis hydrogen, the two that Harris mentioned. That's the largest producer of green hydrogen thus far. But these will fit on 2 acres when you're making hydrogen. I think the next slide will. Obviously, that's the wildfire mitigation. One of the problems we had been seeing in that is the budget to safely cull the forest, which is more expensive than obviously than timber, where you're clear cutting and replanting. This is you want to keep the forest, but you also want to keep it safe as it can be from fire. So culling and taking selective trees and brush out is more expensive than per ton. But once again, we can help offset that. And we're already working with the Butte County Fire Association, Jim Houtman, on that, and working with Napa Recycling, who are very much involved in that. And then our first facility looks like it's going to be at, we're actually working on all three of these next week, is looking to be walnut shells, where we put the facility right next to a walnut sheller. So once again, our carbon intensity score is high. So our idea is to place these facilities as close to the biomass as possible, being 2-acre facilities, and then and in order to once again keep our carbon intensity score up by not having trucks transporting material from distances. So these can be right near the community. They're clean, they're quiet. They'll employ 25 people. They're 24-hour-a-day systems. So we are looking at economic development, clean hydrogen, and carbon remediation of the ground, and agricultural and woody biomass paying for it, and so offset the cost but once again taking it and cleanly converting it into something, two things, very useful things. So I think that one more screen. I think here's going a little bit deeper. This is the basic one. Feedstock is in the course of aggregate waste or woody biomass. There's pre-processing. The humidity going into the combustion, the gasification chamber needs to be between 17 and 22%. If it's drier than that, the moisture will automatically be added. The sensors will note it. If it's wet, if it's more moist than that, then that's what pre-processing is. Pre-processing would be drying it, and that's off-the-shelf technology. The coming off the gasifier, the combustion-free gasification system, you get the syngas. That's when the biochar. So the two materials come out as syngas and biochar, and then the syngas separation, which is the water gas shift and the steam shift and the separation, and the green H2 is will be compressed and then available for delivery and sale. And there, like Harris also said, right now there are 14 different active buyers of hydrogen. Most of that hydrogen they're getting is gray hydrogen, and they're more than happy, and they already are displacing that gray hydrogen. They have all types of incentives to do it, to get green hydrogen in its place. So the hydrogen market is there. The market will ratchet as they see more green hydrogen coming online. And so as I guess the final thing I want to say is that once we have 2 or 3 facilities up, we're working with Black & Veatch. If you go to the next slide, that's a much more drilled down version of what our facility looks like. And the other one's just simply showing the technology. I don't think we need to spend too much time on it. It's something for people to be able to look at and ask any questions of at some other time or even today. Our partners are Black & Veatch, one of the world's largest engineering companies, a leader in hydrogen and oil refining and everything, and natural gas liquefaction, and 60 offices around the world, 24,000 employees. They're our engineering partner. Their anticipation is within 4 to 5 building 4 to 5 facilities, we could, after the site preparation and permitting, we can assemble these systems, because they'll be essentially cloned in as little as 2 months. So we're looking at which also all brings down the cost of it. We anticipate our capital cost to flatten at approximately $9 million a unit. Our production with 40 tons a day is 1,300 to 1,500 kilos of hydrogen a day, depending on the specific material going in, and off of 40 tons. So the ratios that Harris was talking about are fairly similar. KUG is our technology, and Aon is our insurance broker. Munich Re is the reinsurer behind it. So in other words, the facilities themselves will be fully insurable. It's already been determined by Aon and Munich Re. Black & Veatch will guarantee the technology. They've already been working with it. And Carrier Farms is our first facility partner, although we're looking at, as I said earlier, the Butte Fire Council and Napa Recycling. They're moving up fast. We're actually working all 3 simultaneously now. So that's where we are. And if anybody has any questions now or later, we're glad to take them. I think I kept under 10 minutes.
I didn't time you, to be fair.
Okay.
I just had a threshold. Thank you so much, Robert. This is so much information in such a short period of time, although I do know there are folks who are here today that have some background. But I'm curious to just ask both of you a couple of questions, and I very much welcome others to join in. If you have questions, you can raise your hand using the icon or drop your question into the chat, and I'll call on you, or just move around a lot and I'll see you eventually. And the first question I'm interested to ask both of you is about barriers to, I want to say large scale hydrogen, but of course, maybe that's not the objective at the outset. So perhaps the question really is just barriers that you see in confronting the growth of green hydrogen in California. And I'm thinking of things like procurement frameworks, supply chain challenges, transportation. Could you highlight for us a few of the challenges you see in hydrogen?
It's a great question, because we've had to do those analytics in order to put it in front of financial investors who want those answers in high detail. And one of the things that benefits California is obviously they have a lot of biomass. But what our first 6 years, we're looking at 1,500 tons a day facilities that we're going to produce a lot. Actually, we can convert the hydrogen, the carbon dioxide to fuels, to renewable fuels. But as we ran that model, we just noticed that more of the trends were in more local economies, more local grids, smaller grids, and things like that. But most importantly, whether it be RINs or carbon intensity score, those are critical to getting the green rating. And that is the future. Eventually, virtually all hydrogen is expected to be green, so we want to get there right away. And every single thing that produces carbon in the process, including trucks and things like that, bringing the material to the facility. If you have a large facility, that 1,500 ton of facility we are looking at, one was in Georgia and one was in Thailand, and the radius around them of 70 trucks a day coming as much as from far away as 50 miles. That was just killing our carbon intensity score. So the small facilities locally, the hydrogen is a lot easier to move than that much biomass every day. So hydrogen only has to be picked up a couple times a week from our facility. And the people like Airgas and Air Liquide already have customers for hydrogen, transportation, and Shell and a number of other companies are already looking very seriously at creating hydrogen transportation and storage infrastructure. They look at that as a robust part of the market. So what they'll see as they see facilities that can produce hydrogen come online, they'll build the storage and transportation infrastructure, because all the technology to do it exists. It's just a matter of ordering the trucks or the tanks or the compressors and the various things that are needed for it. That's so. I hope that partially answers your question anyway.
Yeah, I think I agree with Rob, and really, I think I would classify it into two different categories. So there are financial barriers, and then there are also technical barriers. To set up hydrogen plants, we did an economic analysis of setting up hydrogen plants with different feedstocks, and also whether or not you integrate carbon capture and storage with that. So for forest biomass, if you have feedstock coming out of the forest, you need somewhere between $100 and $120 million in terms of capital cost. Also, I think getting reliable long-term feedstock contracts are also challenging in the state of California. But then also there are transportation related. We know that we have a significant demand of hydrogen in the state through these refineries, and a lot of them are interested in getting green hydrogen from producers. Then I think what we also figured out was that in our economic analysis is that forest residues are the least competitive when you compare it with municipal solid waste and ag residues. And there are a number of factors why forest residues are not competitive, primarily because of higher cost of feedstock, but also the lower carbon intensity scores that MSW benefits from. So there are a number of barriers, but broadly we can classify them into either technical barriers or financial barriers that also include market barriers.
I agree.
Nick, I see your hand raised.
Thank you. These were great presentations. Just one question back to Robert in terms of what are some of the barriers with respect to local permitting or getting sufficient feedstock, and where you may be trying to line that up, whether from private or public lands, especially with respect to forest management?
Initially, well, you gave us the harder question at the end. Initially, why we're going with at least looking to go to agricultural biomasses because it's a more uniform delivery and predictable delivery, and to get finance, we need 10-year contracts with 5-year renewables, and because we need 40 tons, 350 days a year, and 40 dry tons, and the system in order to. And it can't come up short. So walnut shells are the path of least resistance as a feedstock because they shell them 10 months a year. They harvest them in 2 months, but they shell them for 10 months a year. So we have that feedstock all year round as storage for a buffer for 2 months. But once again, we have the algorithms already set up for other types of more complex feedstocks like agricultural waste that's only harvested 2 months a year, and then the waste is around. So how to store it and things like that. Those things would apply very much towards woody biomass, forest biomass. So as far as being able to store it effectively and have it ready for us, but forest biomass would come out a little more consistently year round than say typical fall harvested crops that are growing the rest of the year. The walnuts and nut shells in general are a different thing. So that's why we went with that. But the forest biomass, we've been talking extensively with Butte Fire and Jim Houtman. They're the ones who suffered the Paradise Fire and things the year before last, and they've been working on it and putting a lot of effort into it, working with Sierra Pacific to get some numbers of what it would cost to go out and cull forests. Depending on where it is, that can get up to $75 a ton. But we can look at if we work with the state of California, we can probably absorb that. So at the far end, right now we're looking at $75 a ton to get it. But once again, putting our small facilities, in as close to the source of the material and between agricultural biomass and forest biomass, we're talking about enough tonnage. If it was all new fuels doing it, which it obviously won't be, there will be plenty of competition at some point. We're talking a couple thousand facilities producing 13 to 1,500 kilos of hydrogen a day. So if it was all gasified with using our method, those facilities would get very close to the materials. Moving the hydrogen is the easy part because once again, there's already infrastructure existing. All you have to do is expand on it, So I hope that answers your question. But the woody biomass is a bit of more of a problem because there really isn't much of an infrastructure in place to go deep into the forest to cull out forest, and so we will start lining up facilities to do in those areas when we see when they see I think it works from two ends: the forest culling and us kind of working towards the middle and figuring out how it gets compatible.
Interesting. It sounds like both an enabling policy environment needs to exist for the woody biomass to be a critical source for near term, but also with a lot of the things that are moving right now at the state and with the federal increasing investment around infrastructure and support for forest restoration at scale, perhaps that will increase the pace at which those become feasible.
Real quick, I forgot to answer one question on the permitting side. We've already gone to GoBiz and shown them all of our exhaust numbers in detail. They were actually excited. Once again, there's really not much of a problem on what comes out of our system in a negative way at all. And Bill Carrier Farms took our design and all of our statistical data to the permitters, and they said there just isn't anything here that is an issue from an air quality or impact. Once again, they're 2-acre size facilities and things like that. They're not really tall. They're not noisy. They're not unsafe. So they're clean enough to be put next to a food facility, let me put it that way, which is very, very highly regulated in California.
Thank you, Robert. Tim, I see your hand raised. Go ahead and jump in.
Hi, Tim Olson, California.
Hey, Tim.
Hey, Bob, how's it going?
Good.
Good characterization of the overall project. Both Harris and you did a really good job describing the landscape. Just for everybody here, my agency has released a solicitation. I talked to Bob and his team in advance to potentially co-fund these kinds of projects. And so we're looking forward to you participating in that. I wanted to ask, it's hard for many people to understand the low carbon fuel standard and carbon intensity, and maybe between you and Harris, because the focus of this is forest systems, forest waste in this case. What kind of work have you done related to the carbon intensity analysis? And this is kind of this is an area that needs a lot more work. And the way I would characterize it is we have to have a better understanding of the fate of the forest before something happens to it, as a way to quantify the carbon intensity. Meaning the fate of the forest. What happens to the forest if nothing happens, like extracting waste residue would be one thing, or a wildfire. And when you could advance that and measure that in a better way, it appears to me that you'll get a lower carbon intensity score, which means a greater amount of money flowing into the revenue to offset the cost. And I guess, so that's a question. What have you done there? What do you learn in that area? And then just an overall comment about extracting forest waste out of the environment. I'm concluding that it'll take some kind of incentive to do that. That right now there's no incentive to extract that waste, and that's a big part of the cost is moving that or processing it.
That's one of the reasons. A good question. One of the reasons that Cal Fire is looking at, or not Cal Fire, but Butte Fire Council is looking at us, and they've been looking at us for about 7 months now. Is because we can actually have we can offset some of that budget for going in and culling forests, to make forest fire safe, more fire safe. It's taking some of the trees out and then managing it. It's done. It does a tremendous job when it's done, and someone has the budget for it. It really does remediate forest fire issues a lot. So that's why I say, being localized, we can put them and hopefully afford to offset some of the easy stuff to get. We can actually pay for and cover the cost of. But the harder stuff, that's where the state's going to have to come in and help some, but not as much if we're already paying for a base amount for it. So it certainly takes care of some of that, the burden on the taxpayer.
Also, a little bit of landscape setting. What we found in our work is, if you look at a given amount of waste residue, and you could process it to produce electricity, and compared that to processing it to produce a transportation fuel, the low carbon fuel standard on average gives you 4 times more revenue than if you produce electricity. Now you can configure hybrid, and I suspect with hydrogen, and you get into the negative numbers, I could be closer to 10 times greater revenue.
The only problem with that, even with 10 times, is that by the time you're taking your total syngas down by 40%, extracting the hydrogen, so you now have less material to work with, and fuel cells are pretty efficient, but at the same time, producing electricity from fuel cells from hydrogen produced from us, we're talking about in the near $1 a kilowatt, and so there would have to be a lot of credits to bring that down. But if for emergency situations, backup situations in remote areas and things like that, that's realistic. That's the kind of thing, that's the kind of dollars they pay, because they're bringing diesel fuel from way out into those areas. So it competes on that level, and it's much safer. But once again, electricity is not really, and also electricity, if you're not using a fuel cell to make the electricity, if you're using a diesel, which there are diesels that do hydrogen now, and they do it cleanly, but it affects your carbon intensity score in a negative way. We're really about getting that carbon intensity score deep into the negative numbers.
Yeah, I don't know if you have a comment about my original question there.
We did a full test with the people in Houston, the people who are the #1 in RINs, when we were going to do fuels, and they ran with all the data. They ran our thing, and we qualify for D7 RINs, which is pretty astounding. It was a nice surprise, and they're the best RINs because of how clean we were. So if we took the Fischer trope off the back of it, not making fuels anymore, it's even cleaner, and extracting the hydrogen. It's all about it's all about that remaining CO. If we sell it into commercial situations, then that'll be the final thing that really pushes our carbon intensity score way, way down. But other than that, and carbon monoxide can be mitigated as well fairly cleanly, but it's an extra cost, but not a great one. But we expect our carbon intensity scores. We're probably within a matter of 3 or 4 weeks by putting up the numbers, because we have the walnut shells in Europe right now, getting them tested to get the gigajoules and the specific numbers off it. So we'll have hard data numbers to submit to California.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to Tim's question about the work we have done on carbon intensity scores. So myself and Dan at UC Berkeley, we have looked at different feedstocks coming into a facility and converting that feedstock into hydrogen and gasoline. So we designed different process configurations. So there are about 12 process configurations based on 3 different types of feedstock. We had municipal solid waste, forest residues, and ag residues. So these are 3 different feedstock and 2 different types of fuels that were coming out of this process. So what we, initially we calculated the CI score for each of the fuel type based on the inputs, and what we figured out was that the CI score for MSW was really, really low, and that's because MSW was benefiting greatly from the avoided emissions. So as you know, when trash decomposes, it emits CO2, and a lot of it can be captured, and you can utilize that CO2. You can utilize that CO2 in other and get like negative emissions. So what we figured out was that in terms of the CI scores for forest biomass hydrogen with CCS, it was about negative 127 grams of CO2 equivalent per megajoule compared to negative 330 for MSW. So there was a significant difference, and that is really impacting the economics of the operations.
And can you describe what those numbers might translate to in terms of dollars per gallon of, say, diesel fuel? Do you have that off the top of your head?
I don't have it off the top of my head, but happy to share those results with you after the call.
What I do know in renewable natural gas is a negative 325 is equivalent to about a little over $10 per gallon diesel gallon equivalent revenue. So the point of your project is if you have high cost, you could offset that with high revenues because of the carbon intensity, the extreme negative carbon intensity.
Absolutely.
In the financial markets right now, they will take into account things that they look at as a government subsidy, and so they will finance, but they'll pretty much cut in half what they expect your income to come from that. Which and because you might have it for a few years, and then a different administration comes in, does things like RINs took it in 2017. The RINs went down because Trump took refining facilities that are below a certain size and eliminated them from having to buy RINs, and the price took a dump. And so those are, and that doesn't help with the financial markets when things like that happen, because for 15 straight years they were working fine.
That's because no long-term contracts for those.
Right. Exactly. But once again, they do know they're realistic, and that now that the environmental issues are now firmly in place as opposed to 15 or 20 years ago, they're more financeable than they were in the past, most definitely.
Very good. Good project.
TL Jim Boyd, can I ask a question?
Sure thing.
A question of you, Robert, and I'm a former California Energy Commissioner, as Tim knows too well. He was my advisor, and I'm now working with Tahoe Fund on, of course, saving the forest from fire, making it healthy, and trying to find some products. We've heard a lot of the barriers that we frankly have been facing for decades: transportation costs, the pure economics of the situation, and pretty much an inability to get much in the way of subsidies. But you're building, and not long-term contracts in the forest is a big problem, as many people know. I'm fascinated with the fact you're working with Butte on a forest project. Do you have a long enough term supply, i.e. through contracts or what have you, to justify the economics for your financiers to build your facilities?
That has been the obstacle I've tried to explain to them, and with some difficulty, because once again, it's that uniform aspect of what our system demands. It's, for us to have the cash register ring, it starts with the biomass being delivered every day, and a buffer amount being there just to be on the days it's interrupted. So yes, forest biomass is the most complex of the ones. The forest slash is a different story. The timber industry loves us to take that, and we'll buy it from them and things like that. But it is a great question. The forest thing still needs to be worked out. I think it's a triangular effort between government, the local people who are in the forest, where fire is a big issue, and the whoever is remediating that forest waste and attempting to offset the costs, or at least a large portion of the cost of pulling that material out of the forest.
So we all continue to face the same hurdles.
But I think taking it down a bit, able to taking it down a significant amount is a big part of the issue. And might help a lot. But once again, it's really getting that. I don't think it's as much a financial problem yet anymore, from what I've been viewing. We're having worked with Butte, as just making sure that the collection methods and the culling methods and things like that can show the financial markets that they're linear. They can be done in a linear way.
Well, good luck, because I'm just fearful we're going to burn more forest down before these hurdles get dealt with.
Jim Houtman's doing his best to make sure it happens sooner than later, so I have to give him a lot of credit for that.
The simple question for you, Harris, way back on your chart of where there were reservoirs available in California, are those deep saline water reservoirs or other types of geologic reservoirs?
Let me just go back to my slide here.
Jim, while Harris goes, why do you ask what would be the difference between the two types of water in service of hydrogen?
Well, this is a place to store. One place to store CO2 is in non-usable water, deep, and often that's very deep. So saline water is, and when I was leading carbon capture and sequestration efforts, that was the most positive potential reservoirs for CO2. These look like natural gas, maybe depleted natural gas reservoirs or something, but maybe. Thus my question of Harris.
Yeah, much of it is like the oil fields, natural gas fields, but then also sedimentary basins, across the Central Valley of California.
A big concern of the public is that they be leak proof. And that's always been a difficult thing to convince people that they weren't. Saline water or natural gas was easier to sell, but never easy, just because, well, it's been there for thousands or tens of thousands or millions of years. It looks like a pretty safe reservoir. Oil fields have never been looked at very positively by folks. But that's just a policy comment from past experience.
Well, policy comments from past experiences are critical to future potentials, so thank you for that. And Jim Hauptman, I was going to ask you if you might elaborate on some of the thoughts that you were sharing in the chat, and then I saw you raised your hand as well, so perfect timing.
Sure. So one of the things that no one really figures in is how many thousands of acres get burned every year, what the economic cost is for that for a community. That includes both the rebuilding and the loss of life that happens, and then the money spent in fighting the fire. And then the health risk that happens with all the smoke that goes on. No one really ever puts a dollar amount on any of these conversations. Additionally, with that, one of the things that we look at here in Butte County, you talking about feedstock earlier, we've developed a map of what our feedstock availability could be. So there's about 120,000 acres in Butte County that's owned by what I call mom and pop landowners. They own an acre, they own 50 acres, they own 10 acres. It's a combination of those things. All above 1,500 feet with less than 40-degree slopes, so mechanized equipment can get in and remove material, do forest thinning on those properties. There's also about 100,000 of federal and state lands, another 100,000 acres of commercial timberland that's owned by timber companies. All of those have potential feedstocks. And, when you look at one of these facilities, it's maybe 2,300 acres to feed one of these. So in Butte County alone, we could put 100 of these facilities up and have feedstock for a very long time. And that's kind of what we're looking at is how do we help the private landowner thin their properties? We get phone calls all the day. We get CCI grants from CAL FIRE to do, roadside fuel reduction. And we show up to do the work and the property owner says, well, I thought you were going to clean all my property. And it's like, well, we're going to do 100 feet along the road. And really what we need to be able to do is be able to help all those landowners thin those thousands of acres that they have.
You're getting there.
Thank you, Jim. I have a couple kindergarten questions, which one of them is that Sheldon Kimber from Intersect Power, there's a recent article, said, as solar and wind are now the lowest cost forms of energy on Earth, we have to find ways to insert them into new areas of the energy supply chain outside of the electric power sector. And one of the most critical, and hydrogen produced from renewable power is the most scalable and impactful way to do that. And Harris, I saw that reflected in your presentation as the source of energy. So one question, I'll throw both of them out there. One question is, does wind and solar as the source power enable or cause a challenge for the growth of hydrogen in the scale of facilities like yours, Robert? Is there any part of that being the source power that is either a barrier or a particular opportunity? I'd just love to hear a little bit more about how to connect those two, because I thought that was a compelling comment and a compelling piece of your presentation, Harris. And the second question I have is also stemming from Sheldon's thoughts, which is green hydrogen goes beyond power and it has the potential to decarbonize very energy intensive, hard to electrify sectors such as aviation, steel, cement making, agriculture, shipping, these really energy intensive spaces. So we're both talking about how do we get biomass out looking at the avoided cost, Jim, to your point, to lives, to communities, to emissions in the air, wildfire, but also how do we use it in such a way that it is offsetting these really energy intensive sectors. So I think my question is really around hearing your perspectives on the dual opportunity there, and just a little bit more color, and that's my sort of kindergarten question for you.
Yeah, I'll try to answer the first part of your question about the wind and solar. So we know that wind and solar, they have made a lot of progress over the past few decades. And in terms of hydrogen production, a lot of people think that wind and solar, and particularly electrolysis, is going to play a bigger role in moving towards bigger hydrogen economy. But we also know that wind and solar are not available everywhere. So there are limitations to those technologies. And also in terms of efficiencies, what we have seen is that if you produce hydrogen from wind and solar, it costs much more compared to woody biomass through gasification. And it's not going to be able to compete with SMR process. So I think biomass, what we see is complementary to wind and solar. We don't see it as kind of wind and solar as a barrier, but biomass can complement in areas where you don't have wind and solar available, and that's where you could utilize biomass to produce hydrogen.
One other element I might want to comment on is where there's a symbiotic relationship with wind and solar as compared to hydrogen, is that hydrogen is not only a fuel, it's also a battery, wind and solar or not. So that there's some specific applications that's advantageous to. I'm sure Harris has thought about this a lot, and but it very much has its own window of opportunity as a standalone fuel.
Tim Olson again. I wanted to add another thing. I've seen projects in Europe, Denmark, Germany, Switzerland, and Sweden, visited projects that combine the electrolysis of overgeneration of wind power primarily with the methanation, a different kind of process than Bob's project, which is referred to as a power to gas system. And the output, it's an ability to capture carbon, but also in conjunction with typically biogas, but could be woody biomass too, and basically is inserted into the plumbing, the gas plumbing system in Europe, and these are megawatt scale projects. So it is possible to do that. So it's not really a competitor, and the output could be renewable natural gas or hydrogen or both, and it's not competitive with wind power or solar. It's really taking advantage when there's an overgeneration, or when you co-locate a renewable electricity project with a fuel production project. More complex, more expensive, but do we have any of those projects in the United States? No, we don't, but they do exist in Europe.
Well, Tim, that's because they're not taking into account in this country, in this state versus Europe, Jim Hauptmann's very point.
Yes.
That we tried to make in the biomass and bioenergy reports of the years 2000 through 2010, that the avoided costs that he mentions far exceed the small subsidies that might have to be given to make some of these other features, particularly the forced biomass. The avoided costs easily would pay these additional costs and still leave a net positive for society if you could do it. But historically, you can't generate in column A all these savings to move them over to subsidize in column B, and thus it's not been politically attractive when there's so many other allegedly attractive things to spend money on in the near term. But if we can get there before burning down too many forests, we can come up with where we're trying to go as a healthy forest, avoided costs of fire, greater water yield, all these things that there are numerical values for, but no way to turn it, to monetize them. And that's about where things were about the years 2010, 2012. There were supposed to be economic studies done on that. I won't get into what happened to them. And here we stand again trying to move this along. Now, it's looking more attractive because, look at the $526 million the governor just set aside. But so much of that is to prepare for fires, not to prepare to avoid fires. And that's the dilemma we have. So I just hope the Butte thing really works because it might be a pilot project. But you throw in some benefits, Jim, and that is low land, level land, easy to get at for those people. At least you'll avoid some fires. Those of us dealing in the high Sierra where it's really tough, and you've dealt there too, we will continue to have problems. And it's true, biomass to electricity, the original renewable electricity in California back in the 70s, let's just say, it isn't very attractive anymore based on all these other technologies. But we've got to figure out some more ways. So we need more of these salons.
There's some lessons we can learn from Europe that
right.
combine more holistic systems.
The political will's been there for a long time, and like you said, the circular argument of the benefits versus offset the cost of the government initiated investments. We just have California is for a long time was the only place doing that here in the United States at all, and so it's nice to be here. Let's get the fires fixed. Jim's done, like I said, Jim's really gotten realistic about what it's he's done it very, very well, and it's the first time I've heard where you have an ever more organizing way to collect the forest material. But like you said, get 100 feet off the road and the game changes a bit, and it's just something has to be worked out.
Thank you so much. And I feel like I say this, once a month, or someone here does, which, humans are terrible historically at placing a value on avoided disaster. And we do it in almost every aspect of our lives, and human behavioral scientists talk about it. And so it's such a frustrating challenge to place into codified policy. I know that I am preaching to the choir. So we're only going to spend a short amount of time still together, but we're actually going to do it in smaller groups. And we're going to have an opportunity, ideally, to hear one another's voices a little bit more. I'm going to drop some prompts here into the chat. And let me just look quickly at Zach's comment. Yes, excellent. We will talk about that. Thank you. These prompts that I'm dropping here into the chat are those that we'll talk about in our breakout groups. We'll only be there for a short amount of time, 12 to 15 minutes, and then we'll come back together. So let's hear a few more voices, and then we'll have a little more opportunity together after that. You'll see an invitation come up to a breakout room, and you can just accept that invite. Hello, welcome back. I know there are a few fewer of us now, but all we're going to do right now is actually something very quick. We're going to go around and have the folks that facilitated those rooms and those discussions, and I got texts, so I know they were good, or at least interesting. Share one or two things that you thought were compelling from your discussion. And at the same time that we do that, I'd invite everyone to open up your chat. And if you could just drop in there something you heard from someone else that you thought was compelling. It doesn't have to be groundbreaking. It doesn't have to be earth-shattering, but something you heard today from someone else or in your discussion that you thought was interesting. And that'll be our sort of rolling credits for the end of our conversation together, if you just drop those into the chat. And at the same time, Robert, you have a good, curious look on your face, so I'm going to go to you first. If you could just share a couple takeaways. Robert Suarez.
Oh, well, we cut off when we were coming back. Me and Spoon and Zach were with Robert, and he was going through the whole, the elegant model that I think will emerge as the EPA's budget comes back together, and there's just potential funding for this type of work is there, and fleets need it. So I think just the discovery that there's a lot of opportunity for this in various areas, and I guess the one challenge that we highlighted was something very common to Tahoe. If it's not broken, don't fix it. Zach was mentioning that Liberty Utilities, as an example, were going to revamp their fleet. Wouldn't it be great to do that with hydrogen? But they're likely just to revamp their fleet with what it was before, because that kind of worked before. So that's a sociocultural thing that I think as a region we could probably get over, or we need to. But we also had Robert in, so it's like, there's nothing that that we spoke about this whole time that he didn't know. So we're just kind of picking his brain for opportunities.
Awesome. Thank you. And I know I'm the only one dropping things in the chat, so maybe you heard nothing compelling. But if you did, I'm going to ask that again. Kristen, how about you?
Sure. Well, I was surprised to find out that there are almost 100 hydrogen refueling stations in the state. We talked a lot about just the distribution network and the practicality of getting hydrogen into the market and where the best applicability is. Also, I love this this phrase that hydrogen is the Swiss Army knife of decarbonization. That was a good one. We had some optimists and some skeptics in our group. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And a lot of theme around opportunity, but this is a very long runway. Like anything, we didn't replace the horse overnight. We're not going to replace petrochemicals overnight either. So.
Thank you. And it's interesting, actually, because I think all of our conversations were pretty different. Two things that I took away from our conversation were the realization, which was new to some, that smaller scale hydrogen is possible. Creating hydrogen from woody biomass doesn't just mean some huge centralized facility in the Central Valley, but it can actually be done in the way that Robert and Jim have described to us today. And then another thing I thought was interesting was sort of the recognition that any of these things we want to do with woody biomass, the stuff we want to do with it that gives it a better fate than open burn and wildfire, all those new technologies require knowing there is a demand for them. And hydrogen, being the Swiss Army knife, has the opportunity to plug into so many different places that it can replace current things. It's like a direct plug and play for a lot of different things, and therefore that makes it a particularly compelling opportunity. And I thought that was an interesting piece of our discussion as well. So thank you all very much. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Harris. I'm so grateful for your time today and for sharing with us your knowledge about hydrogen, the results of your analysis and your work, and the incredible work your, exciting new startup is pulling together, Robert. So thank you all for being here. And Kristen, if you want to close us out on behalf of that foundation. You're muted.
Dang it.
Your brilliance will never be heard.
I would just like to thank everyone for coming, and for those of you who continue to join these salons. It's very important. As Jim said, we need more of them. We need more people at the table. There's a lot going on in the world, and it's the Community Foundation. As I mentioned in the beginning, our vision is to convene smart people and really try to collaborate on big solutions. So thank you so much. And we do not have the next one scheduled, but you will be certain to hear when we do.
Thank you. Yes, this was part of our Making Markets series. So the next will either be in the Stories of Our Forests or the Regional Solutions Regional Management series. So we got a lot of cool stuff in the works around a possible film screening on the horizon. Different take altogether. Thank you.
Thank you, Teal.
Robert, thank you so much for facilitating. He left already. Other Robert, thank you for being here.